Welcome, my friends. This is your host, Mario Lanzarotti, the Freedom Architect, and I have the honor and pleasure to welcome you to the Self-Doubt Solution podcast today with another exciting guest who is up to great things in the world. Her name is Dominey Drew, and she is the premier in rapid and profound personal evolution. She has a direct, intuitive approach that is unlike anything else in the industry. With frankness and humor, she solves in mere minutes issues that people have struggled with for decades. We're definitely going to talk about that one. And she's been featured on Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, ThriveGlobal, and now she travels the world teaching those who seek massive transformation. And she is also packed with a very powerful story because she is a living proof that every human being, despite their difficulty, can be identified as the source and can therefore be transformed. She's a speaker, a spiritual advisor, inner success coach, and healer. And today she's sharing her message to impact-driven leaders all over the world. And that is truly what fills her work with so much passion. And today she dedicates her time to us. Dominey, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm super psyched. I can't wait to see where this goes.
All right, beautiful. Dominey, I understand you come with decades of inner personal work. And I'm always curious how people went to this path. And oftentimes it's like a trigger event that happens. Sometimes it's an array of these kind of events. I'm curious, what brought you to this path yourself?
Yeah, I started this work because I was a complete mess, Mario. That's why.
Tell me more.
I was an absolute wreck. I was quite young. I started it intensively when I was 19, and I was just a mess of insecurities, voices in my head, body dysmorphia. I was overweight. I had all those shoulds, telling me what I should do in my head. Like I found it very difficult to be me. I felt trapped in my body, in my mind, in my life. And it got really bad. I was suicidal when I was a teenager, which I think it's oddly is not really that odd of a story anymore. I think that's starting to be fairly typical. I was just really unhappy. And so I found this work that I eventually ended up pursuing. I've studied all sorts of different modalities, but the first one that I tried, I went to a weekend workshop and I transformed more in one weekend, honestly, than I thought humanly possible. Wow. And I was pretty much sold from there on.
Wow. Can you share what that weekend was?
Yeah, it's a modality called pathwork. Pathwrok. It is very, very, very little known. Most people have never heard of it. I find that some of the best, I'm incredibly grateful and fortunate enough to have experienced some of the best training really out there. There's some really good things, but a lot of really ineffectual type of work. Pathwork is really, really phenomenal. It's incredibly powerful for me, but they don't tend to market super well. They're teaching enlightenment work, self-growth, transforming lives, but they don't tend to, you don't see them on the shows, you don't see them on radio. And so most people haven't heard of it, but it was really excellent.
So now for someone who hasn't been there, and I'm imagining you struggling with body dysmorphia, depression, anxiety, the idea of suicide, so many things, and that you've been carrying for years. And here you go to a weekend seminar / workshop and something happens. And I'm curious, what is it that you heard, that you experienced, that catapulted you out of this deep suffering that you found yourself in?
That's interesting. I don't think, I'm not sure I've actually been asked that before. What exactly was it? What happened that weekend, I think, was a profound shift in perspective, in that all of these things, because one feels trapped because one perceives no way out, right? There's no way out of this discomfort. It's not just like, oh, I'm unhappy, but I'll feel better tomorrow. So I think the deep despair that I was experiencing was almost more than the pain of the moment, the lack of seeing anything shift in the future. And in that weekend, I experienced a shift. I can feel it as I'm speaking about it now. I experienced a shift that resulted, I think this is my thought, in perceiving how these things can change. And suddenly I was like, oh wait, if there's a way out of this piece, then there's a way out of every piece, because what they're teaching there is the structure of the human system, which is basically the enlightenment work, right? How you hold yourself back, how the subconscious items in your human system relate to the conscious ones, right? Which means self-growth. Self-growth means the integration of the conscious self with the subconscious self, right? And so, or with the unconscious self. And so as I was sort of starting to learn about all those things, suddenly I saw, oh, wait a minute, this is something that is a problem. This is something I'm a being that is experiencing this problem, instead of this is just fucking how life is. In which case I was prepped to opt out at that point.
This is really, really interesting, because you make a couple very powerful points. One is, and I can relate to that, as you said, there was a shift in perspective, a mindset shift from this is how it is. I can't do anything about it, just sort of deal with it, to change is possible. And I find that's such a pivotal moment for people, because so many of us, we never get to that place. We're like, okay, that's just how it is. I'm a tree and I will always be a tree, or I'm a stone and I'll always be a stone. And, we're so identified with, and that's the second point, what you're sharing, with the experience of the problem. We don't actually think it's like, we are the one who is actually experiencing it. We're not the experiencing itself, right? That comes into the observer perspective. And as you experience those two things, all of a sudden you go through a profound transformation. And what I find is really the most amazing thing about it is in the short amount of time that you've done it, right? People are like, no, it's not possible. You need to go years at a time to therapy and talk about it. And you're like, hell no.
You don't.
Takes a moment like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And you're right. Most people don't. A lot of people won't even believe me when I share like results from clients and things like that. They won't even, which is understandable, because in their template, in their perspective of what reality is, that's not possible. They're right. But their template is not reality. Their template is a version of reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And this is the entire thing. This is the solution to every problem. This is the essence of self-growth in itself, is this perspective shift. This is, the only difference between a person listening to this right now and an enlightened person is, or a person in epic, by enlightenment, I mean, sheer just bliss and peace, and, the ideal state of being is a perspective shift. There is no difference. Like I'm epically happy now. I mean, my life is this effortless flow of freedom. I love that you're the freedom architect. I mean, like I have architectured my freedom. Architecture is a verb now. But I'm from so trapped to so free. And I'm not special in any way. This is really important for people to know, because people will otherize. You probably see this happen too, right? Like people will, oh, well, Mario's successful. Mario's got it all together. Oh my God, come on. And they separate. Well, I can't because you do. It's like, where do you think Mario was before? And so there's nothing different, or I've just done the work and now I am different. It's the same process for everyone.
And I think what you're saying requires a little extra insight with this whole notion of I'm not special, because I heard people say that a couple of years ago, and I was like, what do you mean I'm not special? Of course I'm special, right? Of course I am special. What are you telling me I'm not special? And I didn't get it for a long time. And I was really triggered by it. And I was like, at some point, I got it. And that for me was the realization that if I say I'm special, then I am disconnecting myself from oneness. Because if I'm special, then somebody else, by that idea, has to be unspecial, which means they're not part of the oneness, which means there's no oneness, which means, it's all about ego. And the moment I really got that special is actually not something you want to aim for, but you want to aim for unity and wholeness. And I was like, well, unity and wholeness is where I get to operate at the highest frequency. I was like, oh, I'll gladly surrender this whole idea of I'm special. I'm not special at all. I'm just like everybody else. I just have a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that I was the exact same way. I hated it. I had to be. It all comes down to what you just said right there. The idea of not being special triggered you.
Mm.
Right. So it's not, it's like, okay, your relationship with being special was, I have to be, or whatever your particular story was that you attached to that. You recognize that as a trigger because you've done the work. But most people will be like, no, I'm just right. I know who I am. I'm especially in the USA. We're like, individualism is like both our core quality and like our massive distortion. And those two things
Mm.
are always at the same place. With whatever your core quality is, you'll overdo it and distort it in defense. But like, we are huge on that. It's like, oh, if you're not, just be yourself, right? And being yourself is it's literally what I do, teach people to be themselves. Like, that's very important. And they take it so far. I have to be unique and different. It's like, there's a downside to that too, which is, as you're saying, you're disconnected, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to
Mm.
try to be special. First of all, what does that even mean? We could spend not only the rest of this episode, but the rest of the year trying to define that, because there isn't any. There's no definition. It's like perfectionism.
Mm.
People say, I just want it to be perfect. Cool. Can you point to what that is?
Mm.
Well, no. Well, hold on, because your entire mindset, for you just shared with me, let's say 30 years, has been wanting things to be perfect before you put them out in the world or whatever, but you don't actually know what that is, because there's no definition for the word perfect. That's not a thing. It's always in comparison to something else.
Right.
By definition, if something is, it's like, I feel like if you look it up, it would say, in the dictionary, it's like perfect is the thing with no flaws. Then you look up the flaws, and flaw is something which makes something imperfect. Like, it's a circular, do you know what I mean? There's no meaning. And so that you're tying with perfectionism, and anxiety is closely tied into this as well. You're tying in this mindset, which by definition can't escape itself. And of course, isn't that just how you feel when you're, linked to perfectionism?
Oh man, I love this. This is getting more and more exciting. Here we go. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. So this is really good because it gives you a perfect picture of what society is going through. It's these never-ending circles. Like sometimes what I use to describe, recently, when I hear a lot of people talk about the same thing again and again and again and again and create like all these dramas around it to support that narrative, to me it's boring, because it's the same narrative that is being perpetuated again and again and again and again. And you just keep creating more evidence for the narrative to remain true. And if you look at the state of the world, so much of the state of the world, people think, oh, what we need is more action. But actually, what we need is more being, is more healing, because the action just perpetuates the underlying narrative, and people are really exhausted, and they are exhausted from being exhausted, and
Yeah.
there's no escape from that. And I really want to elaborate a little bit further what you said about the USA. And if we look at the USA as a whole, and we should look at it from the perspective of this hyper individualism, like, can you bring some more context and for people that are not fully familiar with what you're saying, and like to create like a landscape of the mindset of individualism and how it affects America?
Yeah, absolutely. So the core quality piece it feels very relevant here. What I call a core quality, people have different names for them, is like your natural gift, right?
Yeah.
And what we do you're just born with whatever natural gift. Let's just say you're wildly intelligent. So as you grow up, if you're naturally highly intelligent, when you feel threatened or uncertain, or fear comes, you will overuse that gift, right? If I throw something at you, you'll defend with your dominant arm, right? You're not, because it's automatic, right? You won't just look, I'm going to try a left, right? You'll be like, oh shit, something's happening. So you use your strengths because you're scared, you're defending yourself. So people who are naturally brilliant will overthink, will overanalyze, will try to figure it out, even if it's not something that can be figured out on the mental realm, right? Because intelligence is only useful on the mental realm. So in the same way, so that works on a micro scale with a person, and it works on a macro scale as well. If we think about how the US is formed, it was literally a fuck you to Britain. We're out of here. Specifically because we want to be individual. We want to be free of you. We want to do what we want to do. We want to have freedom of religion, right? And so it was very, yes, very freedom based, and still is, and very individual. Don't tell me what to do. Okay, it was formed on that. That's literally in the fabric of its being. So when you go there now, you'll see that that's a really great thing. Like, I live in Europe now. I'm based in Monaco, and it's very interesting, the juxtaposition. They're not so interested in freedom here. And I was really overdone with it. That's why I moved abroad. I was like, all right, I need something else. But I do find also that I miss it. There isn't so much, you can't really just kind of wear whatever you want, or say, not unkindly, but even authentically, you can't really say a lot of things that you really want. It's just, not that they'll sort of knock you down, but it's not done. It's not in the fabric here the way it's in the fabric at home. Well, that's also being distorted massively, right? First of all, if there's, if you think of the core quality of individualism, it's really kind of anti-community. It's anti-working together. It's do it on your own. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, the American dream, literally, is you come with nothing and you build yourself up. And you can do that. Like, it's not fake. So this is really important, because it's both sides simultaneously. So this is a bit more of an involved perspective. So as people are listening, like try this on, okay? Just like what you were saying, Mario, about the specialness. Well, both things that are apparently completely opposite are totally true, which is you are not special in the slightest. That is accurate. And you are completely special in that there is nobody actually like you. Nobody's actually been born exactly like you, and no one ever will. There are just too many things that make you particularly you. So yes, that is 100% accurate. And it's kind of like 100% useless in a way, right? So one of the things that happens as you kind of evolve, and I'm saying evolve as opposed to learning, because it's a little bit different, is you're able to hold dualities. Like, can two things be true at the same time? Can opposite things be true at the same time? And so in the same way, we see this with the individualism. It is freedom-based. You can pull yourself up. That's a big deal. And, there's this don't tell me what to do. I mean, people were refusing to wear masks when people were getting sick. Like, it was crazy. It was crazy, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but like, it was a really powerful example of like, don't tell me what to do. One that even endangered people around them, even their own family, even themselves, didn't matter, right? People who would refuse to sort of adjust their lives, or even just to wear masks, ended up in intensive care units. My best friend was a nurse, and I had this really interesting perspective into the intensive care unit through that period of time. So you can see how the same type of mindset, which is really very powerful and we'll call it positive, can get then overdone in like, well, you have to be different. You have to be by yourself. You can't just, go along. Community tradition is really frowned upon. That's a shame. Tradition's a really beautiful thing when it's done in a positive way. And so in this way, it kind of comes from both angles.
And I think what you said about, the more enlightened you become, the more you can hold two polar opposites. I think this is so needed, especially in the US nowadays, because what you used to have are, two parties that can come together and have an open discourse and in a respectful way, and then separate and say, okay, now the better one is going to win. Now it's not even about having an open discourse. Now it's just about, how can I make sure that the other one loses? It's not even about creating any constructive. It's just about defeating the other person. And it comes from this deeply hurted self-image. And what you're saying is, the trick is you grow, and you learn to hold both of them. Say, hey, I can see how this is true from your perspective. I can see how this is true from your perspective, and without getting attached to either one. And I think that's a real degree of mastery. And I'm curious, what is it that you think can help somebody come to this place where they can hold two different perspectives to be true?
Yeah, I'm thinking of these words of a teacher I had. I think this was actually a pathwork teacher I had, and she said the extent of a person's spirituality can be measured by their ability to tolerate duality.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you give an example from your own life in what way you have been able to do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's about what's easy from the ego perspective, right? Politically, as you said, it's easy to be all left. It's easy to be extreme left, easy to be extreme right, because then you just, well, you kind of just stamp Jesus on everything, an American flag, and kind of go to town is what happens in my country. But but like it's easy to go from one extreme, and that's what's happened recently is people are getting more extreme in both directions. Neither extreme is good for leading a country, right? Um, uh, from me personally, I mean, in any mindset, it's the same way. I'm right. Mario, I don't care what you say. I'm right. That's an easy place to sit in. It feels good. That's called negative pleasure, by the way. It does genuinely feel good. Be like, I'm right and you're wrong and you're stupid and I'm smart and I can make my whole podcast about it. And people who agree with me will flock to me and they will lend their support and I will feel even smarter. Right. But I'm only leaving one place. So it's not right. And so there's the nature of structure of the universe is not linear. There is never one angle of truth. In order to actually see truth with a capital T, you have to transcend. You have to look down from above in a way so that you're not in one party or another, but you can see, you can, by that point it becomes more than seeing, it's like it's feeling and eventually being. The complexity, all of the different notes, right? Foodies will understand this. You take a bite of a really good food and it's like trying to explain to someone what that tastes like, right? That's nonsense, right? It's complex. It's an experience. And anytime you try to describe experience with words, you're falling short because they're just words. And there's this powerful, and words are powerful too, but use that as like this is how much experience is a whole different level, right? And so in that way, but it is, her words are important. The ability to tolerate duality. Can you go in to US Congress and sit on the Democratic side and really hear the other side? Can you sit on the Republican side and hear, boy, I really hate fiscal conservatives, but boy, you really have a point when it comes to school funding, whatever. Right. And in that way, you dive into the truth of the matter, which is, okay, this part of this contradicts with me. This part of it does not, as opposed to I'm on the left and thus I believe these things. And in that, there's a softening, there's an authenticity, there's an opening to what is actually true.
Yeah. And I find, even myself personally, I don't support either or kind of party, because to me, none of them represent the much needed middle ground. And yet at the same time, I can see how I shifted. Like when I started in politics in the US, when I first came to the US, I was all about, fuck Republicans. They're all terrible, awful people. They're just, the white rednecks from somewhere in the middle of nobody knows where, and they all just racist. And then I was just like super democratic. And with recent, shifts and what's happening also around the whole gender conversation and how that's so forced. For me, it's not, to me, you can be a unicorn, you can be a frog with a sword on top of it. I don't care. Happy for you. But just don't force it onto me in this way, where I'm like, oh, okay, now I can see how both of them have great points. What if we brought all of that together and created something new that's here in the middle, right? Maybe that could be really, really good. And I'm wondering, do you see that this hyper leaning towards individualism actually prevents people from leaning into the duality the way that we have just talked about it? Do you feel that that's a blockage towards it if you compare it to maybe going towards the East, where it's very much the opposite of the individualistic focus, where it's more of the we focus?
I think it can be distorted either way.
Mm.
You know, we were refusing to wear masks. The Chinese were not let out of their houses. It's like it's less about, I think, one side versus the other, regardless of culture, and more about the nature of alignment and defense, right? When there's nothing wrong with individualism, it's great, right? It's really, really good. I've been appreciating it a lot more lately. And it can get distorted, but anything can, right? So when I was first starting this work, one of my core qualities is that I'm very loving. Okay, I am. That's one of the things I'm just very, very good at. Okay, when my father left when I was 7, my whole family kind of fell apart. Siblings went off to school. My mom like checked out for a couple of years. She was having a really hard time, and I felt I was like abandoned. Right. Well, a childhood wounding happens not when a child's life is actually threatened, because obviously I had a mother the whole time, but when the child perceives its life as threatened, right? I didn't know that my mother was going to leave. I didn't know that child services would have come and got me, you know, right? From my perspective, this was a life and death situation, and I reacted thusly. And so what I did was I used our strengths. I overloved, quote unquote. I used my loving nature as a defense. And I became, because I knew that if mom loved me enough, she'd take care of me and I would be safe. So I overdid it. I became a people pleaser. I disconnected from myself. I lost my sense of self entirely. I thought it wasn't okay to be me. It wasn't okay. I didn't get angry for about 21 years. I had, 11 years. Something like that. I had the emotional range I had 3 emotions that were like acceptable in my household. And so I could have those 3, and that was, I just shut down everything else. And so obviously none of that is love, but it's a distortion of love. So I was scared and overdoing it. If I grow up in a culture of, you know, all that matters, that you're allowed to be yourself, then when somebody tries to, quote, restrict my freedom or do something that I perceive as restricting my freedom, I overdo. No, you can't tell me I can do whatever I want, and you react, right? I will not wear a mask. I will not. You can't make me. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, people are getting sick. That doesn't need to get in, right? And then all this, you know, a lot of things fed into that. Similarly on the other side, right? China is incredibly impressive in groups. Incredibly. Community mindedness is like, it's extraordinary there. It's a real core quality of that, you know, of that culture. When things got scary, they overdid that. Shut it down. Everyone will obey. So shut it down. We're locking your doors. You don't get to, you know, And so it's really a matter, depends how deep you want to go. Ultimately, it's a matter of fear and how we respond to fear. Yeah. Right. It really just comes down to recognizing when you're scared and getting to the place where you learn that you are in fact always safe. That is the place that where fear is no longer an issue. I used to be scared all the time. I can't even remember the last time I was afraid.
Can you elaborate on that, on this, you know, this feeling of always being safe?
So ultimately, as you peel back the layers of consciousness, of perception, of illusion, we're going out, guys, strap on. Okay. Because what we've been talking about, let me just tie this back to, because this is what we've been talking about the entire time. When we look at, oh, I had this voice in my head saying that I should always, you know, be a musician. And that came from my mother, and whatever I've taken on from that. If that's the case, then when you look at that with consciousness, the process you and I take people through, when you look at that with consciousness, you realize, oh, but I don't actually want to be. I realized that I just always thought I had to be because of this thing that happened. So you're waking up in that little way. You're realizing that that was something that you thought was true that was not true, right? That's the self-growth process, therapy process in general. You're learning the things you thought were true or not true. So if you look at those as illusions, okay, then what you're doing is you're peeling back the layer toward truth, right?
Mm.
One illusion after another. And then gradually, as you do so, for a while, it'll be like therapy, and you'll be like, oh, yeah, I can be my own person, and I don't need to do what my mom said or whatever. You know, you're sort of releasing childhood bonds in a way, ways that you restricted yourself when you were young subconsciously, which every human being does, unless you dropped into enlightenment at a young age. And and then gradually it gets to be more like the work that you and I do, where it's like it's beyond that. It's like, okay, but who am I really? Maybe like, what's my purpose? What's my legacy? What does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to tolerate duality? What do those words even mean? Right? The meditative type of realm, right? What people call the spiritual, which is fine. It's really more about consciousness, awake or not awake, right?
Mm.
And then you go down into those layers, and that's when you start really exploring the fabric of reality. Well, the fabric of reality is that there is oneness. There is, in fact, no difference in the core material, if we go deep enough, between you and me and this computer and the microphone on which I'm speaking and the air in between us. There is simply different versions, different densities, if you will, of source, or what I like to call isness. And so as you experience that, and I mean experience it, a lot of people can understand it conceptually, as you experience it, what am I afraid of? Am I afraid you're gonna hurt me? Then I experience pain. Is that something to be avoided? Why would I avoid that? Pain is an experience. And on some level, there's a realization that if you and I meet in person and you slash me with a knife, and I go, oh, that was something that clearly I walked into, right? There's a greater perspective. You let go of victimhood. Victimhood starts to make no sense. Oh, I'm not sure why I signed up for that. That really hurt, but okay, here I am. Right. And so with that perspective, remember, everything is perspective, then there's no fear. And then an interesting thing starts to happen, because as I let go of fear, remember, I'm interacting all the time with the universe around me, right? We are technically the same. So as I exist less in fear, I'm changing the way I'm showing up. That changes the way I interact with reality. The chances then of me actually getting slashed by somebody goes way down. So as you sit in the safety, you in fact create and eventually become the safety.
This is so profound and so true, which is exactly why, similar to you, I feel so strongly about this work, because my path was very, very head orientated, very much leaning on intelligence, on seeing, on observing people's patterns so I could stay safe myself. And I had to find proof for everything, because I wouldn't believe it. I was just like, if someone talked to me about God and religion, I'd be like, bullshit, prove it to me. And I would and I would make it a delight of mine to outsmart people, because I am smart, and so it's easy for me to use my smartness, my strong suit, as a way to get to people and to then dominate through intelligence. And then I would feel really good. Look at me, smart me, dumb you. And say, oh, now I've just dismantled your entire reality that you've been holding on to for 40 years. Ha 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 ha. And I feel like, oh, dude, what did you just do? That's not cool, you know? And so that drove me to like really wanting to figure it all out and know it all, until I got to the place where I'm like, I don't know anything at all. But I got to experience what you described. And it was at the time where I did my first plant ceremony, ayahuasca, in upstate New York with a shaman from Brazil. And it was an incredible ceremony. And I was quite skeptical going into it, but at least I felt safe. And at this one place, I went through about 1 to 2 hours of pure sadness, just crying and crying and crying, because I was feeling the pain of my mother and my sister that they had experienced. And all of a sudden, I was taken to this place where it was just safe. And I heard this voice that said to me, I got you and I love you no matter what. No matter what. And I'm like, no matter what? Are you sure? What if I do this? What if I kill 100 million people? No matter what. no matter what you think you can do, I will always love you. I will always have you. And that was so profoundly beautiful for me. I experienced it in like every single piece of my body, that it's just so visceral that I was like, all of my doubt that there is something that is called God, the universe, source, spirit, I don't even know. It's just a name. But I know for a fact there is something there. And it changed everything for me. And from that day onwards, just like you said, fear started having less of an effect in my life. And it's incredible because, if I look at my circles, my family, my friends from, that are not doing this kind of work, I'm the only one that is mostly in a very healthy, high performing, happy state. I can't tell you the last time something bad happened to me. Actually, I can. I got scammed with Bitcoin. I lost like not a lot of money, $4,000. And while I realized that I was scammed, I offered to coach the guy. I was like, I have compassion for you, And I went through that so quickly that I was not an ounce of resentment. I said, thank you for teaching me that lesson. Thank you. Genuinely, thank you for teaching me that lesson. And things like that just don't happen in my life anymore. There's nothing bad. I live in South Africa, in a country where crime is extremely high. And everybody that comes to me asks me, Mario, how safe is it? Do you think that? And I'm like, I've been coming here for 17 years. I've been doing things that most people would never do. And I would not recommend you do any of that, but I did it. And yet nothing ever happened to me. My brother-in-law has been living in a house. Now they have an alarm system, but for 10 years they had no alarm system. One of the neighborhoods that got hit the most from armed robberies. Never anything happened. They didn't even have a fence. Just like me, he's like, I'm safe. Nothing. We're protected always. And so what you're saying makes perfect sense, and it's so true. And once you lean into that sense of discomfort and you recognize, hey, there's something that I'm experiencing, and then there's me, but I'm not the experience, the more you move through that fear. And I want to ask you, because you're so open and transparent, what would you say is your dark side? Like the kind of shadow that you have been, coming out of over your development. But what do you say is Dominey's shadow that maybe sometimes still pops again, or maybe it used to?
Yeah, well, it used to be pretty dominant. I was obviously unconsciously so. It was actually pretty profoundly self-doubt, interestingly. I didn't that's funny. Well, I started to say I didn't believe in myself. And that's one of those phrases that it's interesting. I almost never use. I don't use the word belief at all anymore. Actually, I've given it up. I think I had a rant on that about my own about that on my own podcast. But it was around self-doubt and standing in my own power. There was a lot of ego in me. There was a lot of I would compare myself to other people. I was always not good enough. I was always afraid. I've always felt like I had to control. And it took a lot of energy. It was really tiring. And of course, I didn't realize I was doing it. And I also didn't realize that it wasn't necessary. And I remember, it took stepping out of that multiple times to let that go, because it was very in depth. And this is all over years of work. But I remember the first day I was standing outside of healing school. I think we were on break, and I was sort of looking out at the surroundings, and I must have just learned about this, or something had just landed, the way it kind of does. And I just looked out and I was like, like I was considering letting go of this part of me that felt like I had to control everything. And I remember thinking, well, I mean, I could let it go for just like a minute and then put it back, right? I mean, I remember I was like bargaining with him. I was like, well, because it was my whole reality. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this stuff is so real. To even speak about it is like almost dishonoring it in a way, because it's so fucking real. This is real life. Like, please don't Anybody listening, please don't think we're sitting here being like, I can't believe you're like buying into the human realm. Like it's such an illusion. Like this shit is convincing. Okay. It's not like, it's not about pretending that it's not here. It's not about even walking around knowing it's an illusion per se. I remember I was introduced to that almost a little too young. And I started being like, oh, it's just an illusion. Like somebody hearing your story and being like, oh, I live in Johannesburg. Maybe I'll just unlock my doors. Well, okay, like, hold on, hold on. What we're talking about is ultimate safety, meaning the very, very core of you is indestructible. It doesn't mean you can't die or get hurt or like, killed and leave your children behind, right? I mean, like the world is what it is. We're speaking on a very ultimate realm, and ultimately, it is true. And tolerating duality, we are here on the planet. And that, speaking of shadow, was one of the hardest things for me, was to drop into the humanness. I used a defense, you may recognize the name, called spiritual bypass.
Yeah.
Which for those listening is for those of us who learn, perhaps it's an early on thing, or maybe it's just those of us who are kind of arrogant, would learn about how like we're divine in nature and just be like, oh, I'm above it all. Like I don't need to be human. I'm too spiritual for that. I'm too busy being spiritual. I'll just meditate it away. I'll just clear my aura rather than leave my abusive relationship or like whatever you're going through. But like it's total bullshit. But it sounds like very evolved bullshit. And so and I would use that. And like the solution to that is recognizing you're in it. And the way you recognize that, just in case anybody's resonating, is that you're trying to you're avoiding the messy, sticky human soup of being on this realm in order for the clean, spiritual, divine type of feel, right? That is very real, as is this, but your desire to leave this and go that's where the distortion is. So in case you're inclined that way, or like, I'm just going to forgive them for that, I'm not even going to get angry. It's like, I feel like maybe you want to like punch someone out first. Like that's just really like I have a great tennis racket exercise that I learned in school where you like take a tennis racket and you like hit with it, and it's the absolute best thing for underlying anger, of which I thought I had zero, by the way, and it turns out I had quite a bit. And anyway, I lost my train of thought from all that, but there were quite a few shadows, in short.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being so open. This is definitely something that I relate to myself, that can sometimes happen, that this avoidance of it is like, it's not worth it, it's not worth my peace, so it's okay. And then I end up recognizing that, if it was really not worth it, then I would actually totally be at peace with it, but I'm not totally at peace with it. There's a part of me that's like, fuck you, man, for saying that thing again to me. It's like, and I'm no, it's okay. And that's where I see a lot of the work that's being done, and that's incomplete. A lot of this toxic positivity. Just think positive, just affirm, it's all good. And then you just ignore this person, and you're like, oh, well, let's take a look at that. If you really tune into the highest frequency there is, enlightenment, Christ consciousness, whatever term we want to give that, in oneness, then you can't say, oh, I'm just going to avoid you, because you're avoiding a part of yourself, which means you are then going back into the illusion of I'm incomplete. So that's where I was like, oh man, damn, I can't avoid this shit. I gotta have those conversations. I gotta look them eye to eye, and I gotta come to a place where it really feels like, what? I have zero judgments for you, and I know it's not the right fit for me. This is discernment. This is, it's just not anymore in alignment anymore, but I only wish you genuinely the best. And that's when I recognized, okay, I really have grown, because there's no more longer this fear of losing another person. It's like, oh, but if I say that, they're not going to be my friends anymore, or offending the other person, because I'm speaking only for myself. I'm saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. All is actually right where it is. It just doesn't feel aligned with me anymore. And it helped a lot, to transcend that spiritual ego, and there's surely still parts of that inside of me, to really get into the willingness of being messy.
Yes. It's sheer acceptance. That's the place you're talking about. It is what it is. That is that is maybe the truest statement there is, it simply is what it's like. You are where you are. It's not about you're great and I'm terrible, or I'm terrible and you're great. It simply is what it is. And I feel like going left. Right. But how are you going left? Right. Same thing with the Bitcoin thing. Right. When you said, thank you for this lesson, that could very easily have been spiritual bypass if you were actually pissed. But when you said it, there was no energy. Yeah. Right. This is my intuitive skill. I can sit there and see, I'm like, yeah, you have no energy. That was genuine gratitude. Yeah. Right. Instead of like the gratitude of like, oh, well, I mean, life sucks, but I just have to be thankful. Well, now there's just another reason why your life sucks, because now there's something you have to do that you're not clearly not doing. So like gratitude has to be authentic, as it's not real. You can't bullshit yourself. Like this is you and you, folks. This is your relationship with self. The BS doesn't go far.
And this is what you just said about the have to. I love doing this with clients and with myself as well, where when I listen to myself, I say, I have to do this. I'm like, why do I say that I have to do this? What do I think is going to happen if I don't do it?
Yeah.
What do you think is the consequences into this? And I'm like, interesting. Okay. And then I can get to the place of like, do I genuinely want to do this? And if the answer is no, then I'm like, okay, can I make peace with the fact that I don't want to do this today? And then can I check in with myself and say, okay, right, today, right? It's the first day after Christmas in South Africa. It's still a public holiday because the president, absolute G, because Christmas was on a weekend, the Sunday that was the 26th. He decided that today is an extra public holiday. It's just like, here you go.
Oh awesome. God.
And I could feel a part of myself today was just like, yesterday I was telling myself, okay, tomorrow back into it, and today I was like, you know what? I'm not fully there. And then I had a moment, it's like, but you should. And I'm like, wait, who's saying that? Who's saying that I should? And it's like, you know what?
Yes.
I'm only going to focus on doing the minimum, and I'm going to do it with all of me, and the rest, I'm going to go easy. See where the day takes me. And immediately I felt into my body. It's like, feels really good. Feels really in alignment. So I love what you bring forward with this little check, the language. So do you have to do this? Should you do this? Right? What do you want? What do you want to do? Where is that in genuine and aligned path that you can take that works in your highest interest?
Yeah. And it's always there. There's a little trust in dropping into the reality. Well, what do you mean I won't? And look, it's not like, I don't authentically feel like doing my taxes today, and it's like the last day to do your taxes. Like, as you said, each action you have or inaction will have some consequences. So take the entire experience as a whole. You also don't have to do your taxes. There will be consequences should you not, right? But those are yours to take. You're a fucking adult. They're your feet. Where do you want them to take you?
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah,
so true.
Another message from healing school. I
say this all the time to people, because I get people to that extreme point where I'm like, you don't have to do anything. I said, if you wanted, you could walk out on your kids and children and your children and your wife right now, and you could move to the mountain and live for the rest of your life there. So you could, if you wanted to, take a gun and kill some people. I do not advise that. That's not my, but you could.
People do it every day.
Free human being. You can do whatever the fuck you want. Are you able, though, to tolerate the consequences? Can you bear the consequences? Because some of those consequences might send you to prison. They might send you to war. They might send you on a bridge, you wanting to take your own life. Are you prepared for that? Right? And if the answer is yes, then that sounds like that might be your path, right? But I think if we approach the conversation from that perspective, there's no more resistance. Because you're like,
right.
Yeah.
There's no more victimhood. Like, I have to do my taxes. No. Stand on your feet like a grown-up. You're choosing to do your taxes because you want the consequences that follow the action of doing your taxes. You are choosing that shit, right? So these small ways in which we step out of our power, and I have this look on my face right now, like I'm just like, because it like grosses me out now, probably because I lived as a victim for so very long. But now, like from a place of just like total empowerment, it's crazy. Like from the other side, and it's not crazy from that side, to be clear. Like I have a lot of, again, I spent most of my life there and things looked like they weren't like I had to. From the other side, it's just like, it's crazy talk, like, what do you mean you have to do things? you know, you're, as you said, a free human being.
Yeah. And this crazy talk that you just mentioned, I see people when sometimes where I go into that conversation, when I'm like, yeah, you don't have to do this. You choose to do this, it's your own choice. People get really angry. Like, what the fuck you mean? It's easy for you to say, yeah, you don't have to do what I have to do. Look at your life. Your life is easy. And they get all riled up. And at that point where I come in is what you said towards the beginning of the conversation, where I then focus on holding the polarity and say, you know what? You're right. You're right. You have it very hard, because then at that point, I'm recognizing they're not at that level. They're not at that point. There's still a lot of things that they will go through, where I'm like, you know what? That's okay. If you choose to look at it that way, then perfect. That's your perspective.
Yeah. And the perspective is exactly like, again, sort of harking back to what we've been talking about, sort of like the inherent perfection of things, right? Their perspective is exactly where it needs to be at that point. Also, they've chosen conversation with you. So as you drop in, so with, what you and I do, we're not fixing people. People aren't broken, right? They're exactly where they need to be. I was exactly where I needed to be in that moment of pain. I needed to do that. I wouldn't have chosen to. It didn't feel great, but feeling great's not really the essence of life, folks. It's not. I had to go through that. To me, it's the through is like, I could just like sink my teeth into it. Like that is the essence of the human experience. Whatever it is, you go through it. And as you go through it, as you sink down into, like, I was picturing a bathtub of like sink down into the human soup of like, relationships and like feelings and perspective, right? My mom hates it. She's like super anti relationships and people. And I just love it. I just love it because there's all these because it makes sense to me now. Yeah. But it's the through. You grow and you enrich and you ripen through the act of going through. That's what everything, comes down to. That's how you form who you are.
And what you said about, we're not here to fix something. When I learned that, because I was so strongly working on fixing myself, believing that I was broken, and the more I got into a place of wholeness and alignment, I recognized there's nothing to be fixed about myself, not at all. I'm just right the way that I am. And what helps me actually the most is self-acceptance. And the more I did that with myself, the more my relationships improved. Because now when people share things with me where I heard in the back of my mind, oh, I know a solution to that problem. Have you considered And then sometimes like, I didn't ask you for your advice. I didn't ask you to tell me what to do. All I wanted to do was to share. And that helped me so much with my relationships, because when I hear people now speaking, and even in terms where I know that they're actually drinking like toxin, I'm like, you know what? That's exactly what they need right now. They need to go through there. And who am I to say what you're doing is wrong? I'm not coming from the most enlightened perspective, and when I come into fixing, that's my own ego. And so I've learned to step back and say, hey, that's okay. And sometimes even ask, depends who it is with, is like, do you want me to listen and to just be here with you, or do you want my advice on that? And that question has worked magic. Also, powerful, in my personal relationship. Question.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, because it's the two sides of the same coin. We're back again, right? If you're naturally a healer, you're naturally someone who wants to help others, which you are. That's a core quality. If you're uncomfortable, your partner's coming to you with something and you love her, so you don't want her to be hurting. Notice that those two things are not the same, listeners, right? And instead, so you come and you're trying to fix it because you are uncomfortable seeing her in pain. So the fixing comes from trying to fix your own discomfort. So it's the same coin. I want to help, but from where?
Oh man, this has been so enriching and enlightening. And as you said earlier, we could go on for hours and hours and hours because there's so much more to dive into. But with an awareness of time, I want to give you the last words, Domine, is like, do you have an invitation for people, something, that they get a specific way they can find you or work with you? Is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I've just created a little short course where it's just for 4 weeks, and it gives you a rundown, just these really structural ways of how to change your perception, of how to identify what it is that you're going through. I have a quiz for personality patterns, and all of that can be found on my website, which is domineydrew.com. And I would also be happy to send you a link, Mario, for any of your listeners. I'd be happy to offer a free call to anybody who wants to reach out and just see if what you're going through is something that is something that you have to go through, something that you can accelerate, work through, and potentially even fix if it's something that you want to fix. And I'd be happy to do that for any listeners.
Beautiful. Well, whoever you are listening, tuning into this episode, I want to challenge you to take her on, because spending time with Domine is a real pleasure, and without a doubt, you're going to get a lot of it out of it. And Domine, I want to thank you for investing your time and gifting us your time here today. I feel very, very good after this conversation, and I look forward to more.
Good. Look forward to it as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful. All righty. And thank you for tuning into the Self-Doubt Solution podcast. I will see you on the next episode. This is your host, Mario Lanzarotti, the Freedom Architect. Have a beautiful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Bye.